Hello and welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today will be New York Dore. We will talk about the draft. This show is sponsored by the Well Coffee House, a Nashville area coffee house that provides fresh roasted coffee along with its house-made pastries, breakfast, and lunch offerings. There are 5 locations to serve you in the Nashville area. Those are in Brentwood, Green Hills, downtown, Bellevue, and the Cool Springs Lifeway. More information can be found at wellcoffeehouse.org. The Well Coffee House, where coffee changes lives. We also thank our co-sponsor, Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center, which is located in the Gulch. Our news presented by Sutherland and Belk, a family-owned injury law firm. If you or a loved one has been hurt in any type of accident, call Taylor or Russell at 615-846-6200. See what your rights are and if they can help. Well, the Major League Baseball draft is today, Monday. At least it starts today. It will continue Tuesday and Wednesday, 40 rounds in all. J.J. Bleday will go in the first round, expected to be in the top 10, if not the top 5 overall. A host of other Commodores and recruits will be taken in the draft. That's the topic of today's show, of course. Our guest line, presented by Boll and Branch, started by Vanderbilt graduates Scott and Missy Tannen. I've slept on their sheets for years. They're amazing. Had no clue how comfortable sheets could be until I got these. They are fair trade certified. That means they've been made under safe conditions by men and women who are treated and paid fairly. Try them for a month. You can return them for free, but you won't want to. And once you have the sheets, get the mattress. That was voted best mattress of 2018. Go to bollandbranch.com. That is spelled B-O-L-L. And enter the promo code Vandy to get $50 off your first set. Our question and answer session, and I apologize in advance, forgot to get to the mailbag, although we did answer some of these questions in the show, and we will answer some others in a later podcast coming today with Chip Frederick. Anyway, our question and answer session was sponsored by Vanderbilt fan Josh Minton, an independent insurance agent operating out of Brentwood. If you're looking for a one-stop shop to take care of your insurance needs, call Josh today at 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him on Twitter at Joshua Minton HQ or on Facebook at facebook.com/JD Minton HQ. He is my insurance agent. Give him a try. He's a great guy. Tell him you heard about it on the show and help the people who help this podcast stay alive. Our guest, New York Dore, joins us now. We've got tons to talk about. We've got Vanderbilt's super regional win, which we will probably discuss more in a part 2 podcast with Chip Frederick later today. This podcast is mostly going to be about the draft. New York Dore, our guest, joins us now. My friend, thank you for joining us. We were just having a funny conversation. I was texting you and another buddy of ours last night. It kind of had a feel of 2007 Michigan, maybe in the 3rd, 4th, 5th inning of that game last night, which Vanderbilt ended up winning 12-1. That sounds silly, but it says a whole lot about this team and how it can recover from adversity. New York Dore, thank you for joining us, and hope you are doing well.
I am doing well, although I'm a little tired after having to stay up late night on the East Coast to watch a game that didn't even make it onto broadcast television. So, someone pointed out last night, why are we starting at 8 Central if we're just going to be on ESPN3? But there's not a whole lot of bitterness from the results this weekend because Vanderbilt played great baseball. It wasn't perfect baseball, but they played great baseball, a little sloppy actually defensively, but pitched real well and really swung the bats. And, to that point, I don't know that I always necessarily agreed with you on some of the feels because unlike in certain past years, I feel like this offense, it's just going to, if the pitching staff keeps them around, they're just going to push it through and push it over the top. No, that's not to say that the 9th inning on Saturday wasn't putting gray hairs in everyone's head, but this team is just so complete top to bottom, so tough. And I know one thing we'll talk about quickly before shifting to the draft is the performance at the bottom of the order. Duvall, Infante, Harry Ray, really performing at a high level. And you just could not imagine what happened this weekend happening to a better kid than Julian Infante.
Yeah, I think everybody would second that. We've got limited time. Let's talk about the draft. First of all, in your mind, what's the biggest storyline regarding Vanderbilt in this draft?
So there are a couple of competing ones, and the first one's a little scary, is that there's a decent chance that there's only one starter who returns from our Friday night lineups. And that's, that starter happens to be Austin Martin, who you can make an argument is the best player on the team, and a pretty strong argument at that. But, the two unknowns are going to be Pat DeMarco and Philip Clark. I get a sense that we're going to see Pat back. And I think that, it wouldn't surprise me if either Ty Duvall or Philip Clark or Harrison Ray, for that matter, came back for a junior year. Also, wouldn't surprise me if all three of them are drafted with enough money thrown around that they do sign. So that's pretty daunting. The idea that you'd come back and basically have as few as three incumbents: your center fielder, your Friday night starter, who will probably be Kumar Rocker, and your Saturday starter, who will be probably Mason Hickman. So three people returning to their normal role in the lineup, and 10 weekend starters potentially going in the draft. And that's not easy. So I think that's narrative one. Now, the positive is there's a lot of fresh talent coming in. And, I think that it's no surprise or no shock that most of the people are going to be looking at Del Barton, the New Jersey high school powerhouse, because sort of the two key focal recruits, who are not the only first-round candidates, it should be mentioned, but the two key focal recruits are teammates Jack Leiter, who's considered the toughest sign in the draft class, an impact right-hander, son of a 19-year veteran, and Anthony Volpe, who is sort of the Mr. Do Everything Except Hit for Power guy, who has arguably the best hands in the draft, a good hit tool, batted third on Team USA under 18, ahead of Bobby Witt, and basically does everything and would come in, with a presumptive strong role in the competition for shortstop next year. And if you were looking at, your two marquee recruits, those aren't necessarily the two highest rated recruits, although Leiter currently is the highest rated. But, those are sort of the two really the ones that how good people will view this class, 2 months from now when they are getting ready to report to campus and after the signing period has ended. Those are probably the two that are going to be the most impactful. And we can talk about some of the other kids in a moment, but I don't know. I think, Chris, is that sort of aligned with your vision of what the two predominant storylines are?
The other one would be the Bleday line, and we can circle back to that later, but we got a text from a buddy of ours just before we did this. There's some talk of a Yankees package deal with Volpe and Leiter, which I think that's enough to send chills up people's spines. To me, that is probably the biggest thing to watch. I mean, we know J.J. Bleday is going to go high Monday night. It's just a matter of when. But to me, that is the thing to watch is, can somebody like the Yankees pull off a deal where one or both of those guys are snagged?
Yeah, and just quickly dispensing with the Bleday, I mean, he's going to go in the first 7 picks. He's probably going to go in the first 4. He's probably going to go to the Marlins at number 4. There's some chitter-chatter at 1-1 for both he and Andrew Vaughn as underslot options. But, that's not going to happen. Adley Rutschman is just far and away the best talent in this draft, and it would be a real misstep if he were not chosen 1-1. So my guess is they're throwing around Vaughn and Bleday's name largely to try and, level set expectations for what the negotiations with Rutschman are going to look like. But, the with respect to Leiter, one thing that's been relatively heavily reported is that he's not interested in signing, with the exception of the Yankees and the Mets. And I'm sure that there are some other teams that would be considered there, but one which I would expect is not going to be considered, and it's the MLB.com dropped Leiter in at 34 in their latest mock, in principal part because they have so many darn picks, is the Arizona Diamondbacks. But if the Leiter family is selecting, teams based on how they develop and draft players, I would suspect that the D-backs are going to get a hard no, and that the circle of trust in the Leiter family is really going to be within a core set of teams. Principally, Leiter has the strongest relationships with the Yankees and the Mets, so that would be one worry. I think the other thing that people need to keep in mind is that if the Yankees were going to make a serious push at Leiter and Volpe, they're going to have a hard time drafting anyone else, because the price tag on Leiter is thought to be $4 million and above, so similar to what Braxton Garrett was when he was taken 7th overall, and the Braves were able to hit that because they took him 7th overall. The Yankees are picking at, is it 30, Chris? Is that right?
Probably right in there somewhere. I don't have the draft order in front of me, but it'll be late.
30, and if Volpe is, requesting north of 2.5, and I haven't heard as definitively a number there. I'm trying to figure out how I see the Yankees getting to being able to deploy $6 to $8 million on 2 players with a bonus pool that is not huge. So I don't know that I would be too scared about a double dip. But if you were looking for who might make a run at Leiter, you'd be looking at the Mets and the Yankees. As for Volpe, the team that's been most touched or connected with him is the Mariners at number 20. And those are 2 really, really important guys that we want to see get through. But there are also a number of other guys who could get an early look. One perfect game All-American from last year, Wesley Scott, who, much like Leiter, he's not overwhelmingly tall. He's a 6'1" guy, throws up to mid-95 miles an hour, developing secondary stuff. He's actually done the formal opt-out of the draft, so we do know that we've got one perfect game All-American coming in, who's a big-armed righty. But there are also some more, Kendall Williams, the Mississippi fireballer, also an Under Armour, or rather a perfect game All-American. He's been mentioned in first-round mocks, but also thought to be a tough sign. So we hadn't seen him as a popular name. Spencer Jones, who's the huge left-handed two-way guy, if he gets to Vanderbilt, could be first baseman, right fielder. As well as a left-handed pitcher, throws up to 95, looked extraordinarily dominant on the hill at the Perfect Game Classic. Did suffer an injury earlier this spring, which took a hit to his stock, but I think he's been connected with some teams like the Angels, and we need to keep an eye on him going forward. So, there are a number of other storylines. There are other kids that we will touch on in a second who we haven't mentioned yet, but I think the big one is the Volpe Leiter, because those are the 2 primary concerns in this draft about taking this class, quote unquote, to the next level.
Next on the list of concerns with high school kids, I would think would be Kendall Williams. Now, I do a little bit of work at a website called baseballhq.com. It's a fantasy baseball website. I don't do a lot, but mostly what I do is about this time of the year and before the season, I write up a few just really brief scouting reports on basically college kids. And we're doing a draft board. We try to get the top 50 ready for tonight, try to get everybody we think that might go in the first round. And I was talking to the guy who runs our coverage, and I asked him about Williams because we did not have him on our list of players. And his response was, I'm just hearing the signability, this is paraphrasing him, is going to be tough with him. I guess he would be the next guy to worry about in my mind. I want to see if you agree with that. And are you hearing the same types of things about him being a difficult sign?
Yeah, and Fangraphs did a mock draft, I think probably about 2 weeks ago, where they sort of openly declared Jack Leiter as the hardest sign in the class and went through the 6 or 7 guys who were considered tough signs and first round candidates. It was Leiter, 2 other guys, and then the rest was basically the top half of the Vanderbilt class. So Leiter's tough sign. Williams is considered a tough sign, but his name has been floated around and connected. Jones also considered a tough sign. Part of that is because perhaps the injury dropped his stock a little. Wesley Scott has opted out. Michael Doolin, probably a little more fringy, day 2 type of candidate rather than a first rounder, but also considered a tough sign. He's the big 6'3" kid out of Indiana who is known as having just elite level control. But then you also get to some of the position players. You got Trey Fletcher, who reclassified, and I know there are some mixed opinions on him. He was the number 1 player in the 2020 class per perfect game, but I think Keith Law has indicated he didn't really view him as a significant draft threat because he's not ready there yet to be a real elite level threat. So a kid with just tremendous size and Connor Harrell type build, maybe not quite as tall, but very, very strong kid and a good runner. And then Volpe, Tyler McKenzie, Carter Young, also sort of a kid who probably a day 2 kid, but has starred on the big stage with Team USA and would compete for a middle infield role immediately. All of these kids are considered tough signs. Now, if you're going to tell me that we're going to get all of them through, I'd say that's crazy. I would expect at least 1 or 2 of these kids to get picked off. But unlike in some past years, it's not easy to say who it's going to be, because the two most obvious, the Leiter and the Volpe, it's hard to point and say, okay, this team's going to pick this kid and make a run out of him, because their asks are so high.
With Trey Fletcher, and I've not heard anything to substantiate this. This is just a theory, but you can go JUCO, obviously, and have a year there and then go into the draft. I want to ask you, with a kid like that who was so highly regarded for next year, who's not ready now, is there any risk at all of him doing something like that, going for JUCO for a year so he can be eligible in next year's draft? Because once he comes to Vandy, if that's what he does, then it's 3 years before he can go back in the draft.
He may actually still be a draft eligible sophomore, and his move up, to my knowledge, was largely driven by the fact that he was quite older than his class. He had transferred from a public high school to a private high school before his freshman year and I think he repeated his freshman year as part of that transfer, reclassified to try and get back in the right age bracket. And I think he's still on the old. I may be wrong on this, but my understanding was that he was still potentially going to be eligible as a DE soft. So I don't think his reclassification was, a Bryce Harper, I'm getting to school, I'm getting to the draft faster, so much as he transferred back to public school and reclassified. So I don't know that I would necessarily pinpoint anyone as a JUCO route to stay in the draft. I think, this class is built with kids who intend to get to school. The question is whether the draft picks them off.
Sometimes you have one of those out of the blue things like Kobe Taylor with the Rangers, I think it was 4 or 5 years back, where a kid's kind of got a deal with the team and maybe gets a little bit more money than where he was rated would have suggested. Anything like that you see on the horizon? Because Vanderbilt has got, by my count, 10 high school players in the BA 500. No, the BA 500, that's not the top 500 high school prospects. That is the top 500 prospects for the draft period. So that includes college kids, JUCO kids, and high school all lumped together. Do you see a kid in the lower end of that? Because Vanderbilt has got 4 guys on the other side of 300, plus Max Romero at 275. Do you see like a Kobe Taylor risk lurking in the weeds somewhere?
Yeah, and so Perfect Game is a top 600, and there are 14 recruits who are in that. 14. That's just silly. The position that still keeps me up at night, and it sort of always keeps you up at night, is the catcher spot. Now, there's actually some built-in flexibility on the catcher spot in this class, in that we've got a couple of kids who project out at positions other than catcher who have impressed in high school behind the plate, namely Carter Young. And it's kind of weird to see, maybe it's Craig Biggio style, where you've got a guy who's both a second baseman and a catcher. But Carter Young has played behind the plate a bit and has good throwing actions. Doesn't necessarily have the build that you would normally think of for a catcher, but apparently can get it done. And Chris McIlvain, again, the former mini Vandy boy who starred for Nashville South in the Little League World Series, is a right-handed pitcher / third baseman / catcher, and he's actually listed principally as a catcher now on Perfect Game. So, there's a little flexibility and backup there, but what sort of gets you going, what sort of gives you a little worry is, the 3 catchers on roster right now are Steven Scott, a senior, who's going to be gone next year, Ty Duvall, a junior, who is coming on strong at the end, and all he does is hit, and he's getting his opportunity to actually catch behind the plate as well. He could very well be gone next year. Phil Clark, who is a draft eligible sophomore, and I think a lot of people think will be drafted high enough and with enough money to forego. And then you've got, Dom Keegan, the right-handed bat. And then you have 2 left-handed bats two really highly rated catchers in this class who are in sort of the top 100 to top 200 range. You've got Max Romero out of Florida, who's a very accomplished defender and also a hitter. And then CJ Rodriguez out of Mater Dei in California, who's an extraordinarily accomplished defender. And, it is a deep class in catching talent, but catching talent's always one where you're a little worried, because there is always the concern that depth and injuries could end up with a scenario where suddenly you've got Aaron Westlake catching, and then, then everyone's going to cry. So that's Romero and Rodriguez are 2 I'd keep an eye on. I don't think we're through the woods on Sam Labaki and Michael Doolin, 2 big right-handers who project really well. Nick Maldonado is a kid who all of the middle infielders, Maldonado, Young, McKenzie, Volpe, you've got to keep an eye on. So there are some kids who could get picked, and it would not surprise me. But, unlike in past years, it's a little harder to sort of say, okay, this kid's going to be a risk, and these are the teams that we have to worry about, with the exception of Leiter, Volpe, Jones and Williams, where there's been a little bit of chit chatter.
How do you see the separation, say their top 6 guys? Let's say it's Leiter, Volpe, Williams, Fletcher, Jones, Young. First of all, would you agree, is that their top 6? And do you see those guys as similar to each other in skills and ability, or do you see some separation? I mean, I think Leiter and Volpe probably are the top 2, and there's some drop-off from there, but I'm interested to see how you see it.
Yeah, so I think, there's a lot of potential in some of the kids in this class, and these rankings are not on, is this kid going to be a great college player? These rankings are, is this kid going to be a great pro prospect? Now, there are some exceptions. Like, we've got a couple of top 100 kids, a foursome of top 100 kids who had put dollars to donuts, they're going to be college stars. And that's, on the mound, Leiter and Doolin, and on the in the field, Volpe and Young. I think those four, you can be pretty sure they're going to be impact guys when they get to campus. I'd feel really good about guys like Williams and Scott, who have tremendous stuff and have performed at the highest level, but aren't maybe necessarily as polished as Leiter and Doolin. And then you've got the guys like a guy like Spencer Jones, who the potential is just through the roof. The question is, what happens when he gets to this next level? Now, he impressed significantly at the Perfect Game All-American Classic, but the SEC is very different from a showcase tournament or a showcase event. And then you've got a couple of other upside fielders in Trey Fletcher and Tyler McKenzie, where you're sort of dreaming on development, but that doesn't mean they can hit an SEC slider. And so, when we talk about the separation in sort of the top 100 type kids, there's some different characteristics, but I don't know that you can say with certainty whether this guy's going to be better than that guy, other than where they're rated is reflective of their upside rather than their present. And there are a handful of guys who I think have high floors. And again, that's going to be, Leiter, Volpe, Doolin, Young. And then there's going to be some kids who, just have ceilings that are through the roof.
Let's go to the current roster. Where do you think J.J. Bleday goes?
Marlins 4.
Yeah, that's my gut too.
Yeah, I mean, I just can't imagine that someone would pass Adley Rutschman 1-1. And it is true that if Rutschman gets past 1-1, the whole draft, the whole top 7 could sort of get thrown into flux, because it's actually weirdly, Rutschman is probably more likely to go 1-3 if he doesn't go 1-1 than 1-2, which is a little bonkers. But it sounds like Bobby Witt is pretty much locked into to 1-2.
I have 2 wild cards in this draft. You touched on catcher. I think that's a fascinating position for them next year, not just because of the prep catchers in the class, which you addressed, but because you have Ty Duvall sitting there, who's had a great year. You have Clark, who you think is probably going to get picked high enough to get drafted. I'm curious, though, what you think his ceiling is. I love his bat. I think there's more to come. His defense got a lot better. I don't think it is out of the question that Clark could come back and have an SEC Player of the Year type season if that's what he chose to do. If he does that, is he a kid who has a chance to maybe get into the first round next year with a great year, or do you think the ceiling is lower than that with him?
Yeah, it's weird because you look at Phil Clark and he sort of reminds you of Aaron Westlake at the plate, except Aaron Westlake not in his rough freshman year, but straight transporting him into the times when he sort of just owned the zone. But there's nothing you point at about Clark and say, okay, that's an overt weakness. He has power, even though he's not necessarily a power hitter. I mean, the ball he hit last night must have gone 425 feet, and that was down the line. Maybe it's 400 feet down the line, but he hit a long darn way. You've got that. He doesn't have blazer speed by any chance, but he leads the team in triples, tied with Austin Martin on the year. It's funny how that happens when a center fielder dives for a ball, right, Chris?
Exactly. Yeah, the quote unquote triple.
Yeah, I think he hits his triples in a very different way than Cooper Davis hits his triples.
No doubt.
But you look at his throwing, and his throwing is excellent. Although when he gets to the pro level, I think they'll try and talk him into actually standing on more of his throws. But his arm is great. His framing is very good. Not yet elite, but very good. He could come back and probably improve his footwork behind the plate a little, and that is principally blocking, and also how he handles pitches that are way high. It's been, and those aren't easy to handle at all, particularly when you're dealing with guys who throw 95, 96. But we've seen it with Clark. We saw it again last night with Duvall behind the plate, where the Vanderbilt catching staff really has struggled a bit with receiving balls that are up in the zone. But I think those are the two areas where you can see some improvement. I think if he hit for a little more power next year, he likely could improve his stock a bit. But he's been seen a lot, and I think he's probably pretty well understood. And I think that scouts will probably value the significant jump he took between freshman and sophomore years defensively, and try and project that out into a quality catcher who could see major league service.
Something I noticed last night, and I don't pretend to have a scout's eye by any stretch of the imagination, so I could be speaking out of ignorance here, but I watched the way that Indiana State defended him at times on Sunday night, and I noticed that they shaded him a little bit more towards left center. The right fielder was not around as much. And now he did get one out to right last night, and as you pointed out, hit it pretty well. But the elite guys, a lot of times, they've just kind of got that tomahawk swing where they get around on one so quickly. I do wonder, and maybe when a guy is played a certain way, that is also an indication of how they're trying to pitch him. Maybe that's all it was. I do wonder if, as good as his bat is, and I love his bat, does he have that little, just almost imperceptible quick twitch, maybe deficiency compared to Bleday that holds him back a little bit? I wonder if that's part of it, because I think the skills on the whole, like you said, it's really hard to find a flaw. You've got to look at the really little things that separate the elite guys from the next level, like Phil Clark. That's not a knock on Clark at all, but as I was watching him and thinking, okay, he has not really turned on a ton of fastballs and just sent them 400 feet inside the line to right. I wonder if that's the thing that holds him back just a hair.
Yeah, I'm going to go no, simply because I think that a scout's eye looks at the potential rather than the present. And that's the reason why J.J. Bleday was a first rounder last year when he'd had 6 career homers, and why he was the top prospect in the Cape League when he had, I think 5 homers over the summer in the Cape, something like that. So they see this, they see the power potential. They see a swing, how it'll develop. Now, is it better when you're wielding a hammer like JJ and Stormbreaker? Then yeah, but I think you see a lot of positive characteristics in Phil Clark's swing, and you don't necessarily need to see the ball get out over the fence to be able to look at it and see potential to get out over the fence.
The other wild card, and I do wonder how much Sunday night could affect things. Zach King was great on Sunday. He got 2 1-2-3 innings. He was hitting 96 to 98 on the stadium gun consistently, which is the highest that I have ever seen him sit. I don't believe, now I scanned the list twice for Baseball America, and I could have missed with 500 names. I did not see King on their top 500 prospects list, A, which surprised me. But combined with B, the fact that he threw so well on Sunday night in his last glimpse, I really wonder, because all it takes is one team, where he will go, and if a team is in love with him enough to pick him at a spot where he says, hey, I'm not coming back, because I think that's what we all expected coming into this year, that the King would be gone. But this has been such an odd year for him, and to add to the oddity, it's how well he finished last night, which was by far his best outing of the year. I don't really have a good read on him. Do you?
I'm going to go out on a limb and tell you that both Zach King and Jackie Fastball are still considered strong prospects despite disappointing years, and both of them will be drafted and get decent bonuses. And while King, I don't think, was on the BA 500, he was on the PG 600 and checked in at 5'12" there, and was referred to as the ending quote on his little capsule is, "There's upside here given the size and arm talent, but the risk profile is also high." And with Jack Gillis, he's up at 335, and I think he was around 400, 450, 500 on the VA. He was still hanging in the VA 500. It's the profile of what they can potentially bring to the table. And with Gillis, it's mid 90s with good life on the fastball. Secondary, not as good. With King, it's the good sinking fastball, good velocity, workable slider, workable change. And with both of them, it's just commanding it. And they've each flashed elite potential over the years. And really, King's biggest issue is learning to pitch inside without hitting people. That's been the root cause of all of his troubles over the last 2 years. It's never been stuff. And the command has never, with a handful of a couple of aberrant appearances, the command's never been terrible. He'll get too far inside, catch an elbow on a player, and then it just sort of goes south, and then he'll groove a couple pitches and get hit. With Jack, I don't think really anyone really knows what went wrong with him this year, but the potential is huge. I think both will get drafted. I think both have fans in the scouting community, and I think both will be viewed as good risk reward value selections for a team, in that had they had the years they would have wanted, they would have been much more expensive than they are without dynamically or dramatically changing their risk reward profile. And the other thing about both of them is they both have been relievers at Vanderbilt, but both of them have started also. And both of them can be viewed as having the endurance based on provable 5+ inning appearances, as well as the build to be starters. So I think you've got two guys there who will be snapped up as projects, probably somewhere in the 20s and around would be sort of the ideal place to pick them. It also would not incredibly surprise me to see a team actually select them with an effort to underslot them in the 6 to 10 range, but they'd have to have a pretty good understanding that underslot would be accepted. But I could see either of them going anywhere from, if they're willing to go underslot, 6 to 10, if not, anywhere between 11 and 25. And probably not the 11th round, probably the 12th to 25th round. I would see both of them as picks that a scout could get excited over, because they think they can deliver something at a good value given the risk reward.
Well, a 6'4" lefty who had 2 productive years and is throwing 98 in his draft year and throwing strikes in his last outing is going to get drafted. He is very much a draftable prospect. I just could not figure out why Gillis was 337 and the BA 500, Raby was 447, and King didn't make the top 500. That just, to me, was something I don't understand. Now, I understand that Gillis, if his stuff is on and he's confident, he's the best prospect of those 3. But I just was kind of shocked, with upside being what scouts are looking at, that King didn't crack the BA 500. That was a mystery
particularly because he's 6'6".
Right, I think I said 6'4". You're right, he is 6'6".
Yeah. And he's every bit of that. I mean, him and Fisher are just incredibly imposing from a size perspective. Fisher at 6'5", 185, King at 6'6", 210. It's all kind of angles coming at you.
One more wild card before I want to finish up on some other upperclassmen, and then we end the podcast. Pat DeMarco is the other one. He, of course, has ended the year heading into the Super, hitting well. I think his stock from when you and I had talked has dropped a little bit in the season. I think being hurt probably didn't help, or at least it deprived him of an opportunity to really climb up draft boards a little earlier in the year. I think we both think he's coming back, but that could be one too where a team falls in love with a guy and gives him a deal that's too good to pass up, because he'll certainly get drafted next year, and he's got 2 years of leverage. He's the rare draft-eligible sophomore. That, to me, not as interesting a case as Clark, but it's interesting nonetheless.
Yeah, I think that's right. And what people have to remember is that a move in consensus doesn't matter. All you need is one scout to be sold on you and to put a hard sell to a team's administration, have a cross-checker come down and agree with the scout. And that's the recipe for getting drafted higher than consensus. Because all you need is one team. 29 teams can give up on you. And if you get one that believes in you, then you can get picked a lot higher than you'd expect. Now, that doesn't always work out. Like Kobe Taylor would be one example of where that doesn't work out, and 2 years later he's out of baseball. But with Pat, I think, there's been a consistent concern because his swing looks long. I think it looks longer than it actually is. And he just goes through periods where he's locked in and periods where he's not. And you can pitch him. He is not someone like, for example, Austin Martin, who, if you asked me how to pitch to Austin Martin, I wouldn't know where to start, because I don't think there is a definitive strategy on how you pitch to him. He's just too good. And with DeMarco, yeah, you can come up with a strategy and attack him. And you might have some success there unless you make mistakes. But I think, Pat has a lot of talent. He's got speed. He's got a decent arm. He plays defense generally quite well. And he's got a lot of pop in the bat. And, I think that people would probably like to see him be a little less pull happy and drive the ball to right a little bit more. You'll see him when he's on drive the ball to right center. You won't ever really see him spray it the other way, like, for example, a Bleday or a Martin can. But I think the expectation right now is that we will see him as more likely to return next year and sort of anchor the lineup. And when you're looking at, who might come back next year, I think there's a decent chance we see Harry Ray return. Not a surefire thing by any means. He's played well. And I do want to correct the record also. I'd said he's playing out of position and all year, correcting the record on that for the infamously named Chet Lemon Juice. He was, in fact, a middle infielder playing shortstop, principally for several years of travel ball. But Harry Ray has performed well. Would not surprise me to see him taken and see him sign. Ty Duvall, I think the most underrated player on this team over the last couple of years, could very well see him sign. Phil Clark, Pat DeMarco. So we could end up with any of those guys coming back. And then also, we should not forget that Cooper Davis was also a starter on this team, and a kid who had a lot of success, hitting like 330, 340, like an 870 OPS or something like that. And one of the most fun kids to watch we've seen in a while. He had his little injury, so he's been supplanted in the lineup by Duvall at DH, and we hadn't really seen him get a chance to get going again. But really, really a fun kid to watch, and one who I would expect to be our everyday starter in either left field or center field next year.
Okay, wrapping up a few guys that we did not talk about on the current roster. Drake Fellows, 161 in the BA 500. Ethan Paul, 335 in the BA 500. Of course, Paul is senior. He'll have to go. Steven Scott, not ranked in there. You mentioned Ray, who I think has improved about as much in the last month as any Vanderbilt player I remember improving in a month. What sticks out to you among those guys that we didn't really get into?
Yeah, so I think, there's 7 seniors on this roster academically. That's Raby, who will be drafted, Scott, who will be drafted, Paul, who will be drafted, Julian Infante will be drafted, and I think he will play. I think A.J. Franklin, a redshirt junior, is likely to be drafted. I don't know of those guys who's going to get a really, really big bonus and who's going to be somewhat of an underslot sign. But I would think that we're going to see a bunch of those kids get drafted in the first 10 rounds, so day 2 picks. I don't think Kiambu Fentress and I think Walker Grisanti are going to both be moving on to different things. There's a really nice article recently about Walker and his interest in becoming likely a college football team trainer, and he certainly has the build for that, I guess is probably the best way of saying it. He's like freaking Popeye over there. Drake Fellows is obviously a junior, not a senior, and I would expect we'll see him go early on day 2. And I think he did well for himself this past Friday with a really outstanding performance. So, there are a lot of, when you actually look at it and think about it, you've got, of the 5 seniors, I think you've got a pretty good feeling that 4 will get drafted. Of the 2 redshirt juniors, I think you got 1 who's going to get drafted, so you're up to 5 draftees. If I would imagine that Gillis, King, Fellows, Bleday, Ray, Duvall, and each of them get drafted. Whether or not they sign, it's a different story. And then DeMarco and Clark, very good chance that both of them get drafted. So you'd be up at 13 draftees, which, if I remember correctly, would be 1 higher than the 2000 team who set a record with 12 draftees. And that's really something that will be interesting to watch over the next 3 days.
New York Dore, thank you for joining us. This has been a great podcast. Where can people find you on Twitter?
They can find me at VU Hawk Talk, at VU Hawk Talk on Twitter. And we're now cheering on 25 wins in 26 games. And that's one heck of a run. And this upcoming Duke series will be interesting. I think Vanderbilt's pretty well positioned. And put it separately, if I were an opposing team, this is the team I would not want to play.
Agreed with all that. He is New York Dore. I'm Chris Lee. Thank you for listening to the Vandy Sports Podcast. We'll be back with more episodes. Should have one later in the day with Chip Frederick wrapping up Vanderbilt's appearance in the regional. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for more episodes coming quite soon.